Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland, with me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast. My name is Kelly, and today we're talking all about the major wedding timeline mistakes. I'm going to list 6 things that couples tend to do, but I'm not just going to tell you the mistakes. I'm going to tell you how to avoid them and how to plan a wedding in the perfect order. So when I'm talking about timeline mistakes, I'm not talking about the timeline of the day. So I'm not necessarily referring to your wedding day program or schedule. I'm talking about the timeline from when you get engaged to when you get married and all the steps that happen in between. So when it comes to making certain decisions, it's a lot easier if you know the order in which to do so. And if you get the timing of those things right, you can actually end up avoiding a lot of wedding planning stress. So when I say wedding timeline mistakes, I'm talking about the mistakes that couples make while they're planning their wedding and as they make decisions. But before we get to the actual list of mistakes, I want to quickly give a little bit of a teaser about something that's coming next week. So next week, Wednesday, we're going to be talking about wedding icks. Now, I have a lot of icks in life, and I thought it would be really fun to hear from you guys about your wedding-related icks. And so if you have any icks, you can let me know. You can comment on any of our social media posts. You can DM us on Instagram. We're at Weddings Online. You can send me an email. It's kelly@weddingsonline.ie. You can comment on this episode. However you want to get me your icks, I would love to hear things that you have seen at weddings, whether you were a guest at a wedding or you were on the wedding party, or maybe you saw videos or photos online, whatever it is. If you've seen things that give you the ick, I want to hear about it. I want to hear about the things that make you cringe when you see them, things that you think maybe are like very outdated or just so overdone. Whatever it is, I want to hear about it. We're not going to be judging people, but we're going to be laughing at the icks. And kind of like in today's episode, I'm not just going to tell you the icks, but we'll be going through some things you can do to avoid giving your own guests the ick. So you won't want to miss that. It's going to be a little bit different, a little bit fun. I will have a special guest with me and we're going to chat and laugh together. So don't miss that. That's next week, wedding icks. But let's get to our 6 major wedding timeline mistakes. Wedding timeline mistake number 1 is booking suppliers too soon. Now, you may be surprised that this is even a mistake, but it is because there is an order in which you should book your suppliers, which makes perfect sense. So if you book your suppliers too early, what can end up happening is you might choose suppliers or a venue that ends up not fitting the style of your wedding. So here's how you can avoid that error. You can begin by deciding on the type of wedding that you want to have. So we actually went through a lot of this in detail in episode 33 of the podcast, where we spoke about a wedding style, we spoke about choosing the colors and putting language to how you want your guests to feel when they're at your wedding. Now, once you've nailed this, you'll know what kinds of suppliers you want to have. So if you've decided that you want to have a very elegant wedding, that will dictate the types of venues you look at and the kinds of suppliers that you choose, because they will produce an elegant wedding. Whereas if you want something very different and you're actually looking for a very relaxed kind of boho wedding, you'll then look at a completely different set of venues and suppliers to somebody who's planning an elegant wedding. So as you can tell, if you book your suppliers too soon, before you've had a chance to really analyze and articulate the wedding you want, you may end up with a bit of a mismatch of a bunch of suppliers that don't necessarily have the style that fits your theme. Another example is if you buy your wedding dress too soon. Let's say, for example, you're having a 3-year-long engagement, you see a dress at the beginning and you buy it. What might end up happening is by the time you get to your wedding day, your dress is out of style, and you might not even fit into it properly. Perhaps you lose weight or gain weight, whatever it is. So I always recommend that if you get the timing of these things right, you can avoid a lot of stress and a lot of panic. Item number 2 this one might surprise you based on item number 1, but item number 2 is waiting too long to book suppliers. So now there's a sweet spot. You don't want to book suppliers too soon, as we've spoken about, but you don't want to wait too long. And here's why. If you wait too long, you may miss out on the perfect wedding supplier team. Suppliers actually get booked up very, very far in advance. So when I'm saying don't wait too long, what I mean is that some key suppliers like your venue, your photographer, some wedding planners as well, often get booked up at least a year in advance. And there are other suppliers that have a similar timeline as well. So while you don't want to book people too soon, and while you definitely want to get your branding, your colors, and your feel of your wedding all sorted first, you don't want to waste too much time. So if you come across a supplier and they tick all the boxes, they fit into your budget, they match the style and aesthetic that you're going for, just book them. You don't want to miss out on the best band in the country if you've just delayed. So don't wait too long. This is particularly important for anybody who's getting married during the popular wedding dates. So that would be your peak dates like summertime, it would be Saturday, Sunday, even Friday weddings, anything around a bank holiday. Those popular dates tend to book up really, really quickly. So if you're picking one of those days, make sure you don't delay when choosing your wedding suppliers. Item number 3 is sending out the save the dates before you find your wedding venue. Now, there is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. Do you make your guest list and then you invite your friends and family and hope that you end up with a wedding venue that they can fit into? Or do you choose a wedding venue, find out who they can accommodate, and then create a guest list based on that? There really isn't, there aren't a whole lot of wrong things that you can do. But one thing that you can do that would be wrong is if you create a guest list. Let's say you create a guest list and there are 200 names on the list and you send out save the dates. Then you find your dream wedding venue and it ticks all the boxes, except it can only accommodate, let's say, 150 guests. So what do? You either book your dream venue and have to uninvite 50 people, not recommended, or you have to forego that dream wedding venue and look for something else. What you don't want to do is book the venue, invite the 200 people anyway, and hope that 50 of them can't come. That's a recipe for disaster, because what do you do if they can all come? So what I recommend is, it's not necessarily the most precise way of doing things, but I would always recommend starting with a rough guest list. So your rough guest list would include all the people who absolutely have to be at your wedding. Then you have an idea of the numbers you're working with. You then begin looking for wedding venues and you find a venue that can accommodate the amount of people you want to have. And then you save the dates. If in that process you find a wedding venue that can only accommodate a smaller number of people, you can then tweak your guest list to see if there's anyone you could cut out, and they would never know that they've been cut out because they never received a save the date or an invitation. So that's what I recommend. It just does help you to be a little bit of a step ahead, so you know you're looking for venues that can actually fit everyone in, and then you're not going to have the stress of having to uninvite people, because that's really awkward, and actually that is kind of a wedding ick, if I had to say so. How about item number 4? Waiting till the last minute to book a videographer. This was me, actually. I waited until, I think it might have been a week before the wedding, maybe 2 weeks, to decide that I actually wanted a wedding videographer. And I'm so, so glad that I made the decision to get a videographer. I just wish I'd thought about it sooner. I've looked back at our wedding video and I've seen moments that I don't remember happening. And I'm talking about things that I was a part of. So there's obviously the whole side of your wedding where your guests and your wedding party and your family and friends, they're all doing things that you're not aware of. You know, if you're having pictures taken and somebody's, playing games or whatever it is, of course, if you weren't there, you wouldn't know it happened. And so seeing that on video is really special because you can live the moments that you weren't part of. But there's something really trippy and actually very special about watching a moment that you were in, but you don't remember. And so having a wedding video is actually really special because it helps you to actually fill in the gaps in a day that breezes by so, so quickly. But the timeline mistake is when couples wait till the last possible minute to realize that they actually want a wedding videographer. And the reason that it's a mistake is that, like I mentioned before, suppliers get booked up really quickly. So if you have a set budget and you don't have any wiggle room and you go to a wedding videographer 2 weeks before the wedding and say, are you available? You might find some who are available, but you will definitely be paying more than if you find someone earlier. There are probably some unicorns who will fit the budget and be available, and it will be last minute. But it's, again, asking for stress, and you don't want to be panicking. You don't want to be, scrambling to find somebody. So factor in all the suppliers that you want to have and then book them. I can tell you now that not hiring a wedding videographer is the number one regret that we see couples talking about over and over and over again. You don't want to be one of those people. So don't wait till 2 weeks before or 2 minutes before and decide, I need a wedding videographer. I'm telling you now, you're going to want one. Okay, item number 5. When it comes to wedding timeline mistakes, what we often see is a mistiming of the invitations and save the dates. So now, you don't want to give guests too much time to respond. What ends up happening is they put the wedding invitation aside, they forget to RSVP, you then have to chase them. If you give them too little time, then you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself and your timeline. So what we recommend is to send your invitations at least 6 weeks before the big day. What ends up happening then is you give your guests about a month to get the invitation and send in an RSVP. You then have a 2-week buffer period where you can collect the RSVPs and give the figures and the head count to the suppliers that need that information. So you will always have somebody who doesn't RSVP. I can absolutely guarantee it. And it's not that they are disorganized or bad people or that they're not excited about your wedding. It's just how people are. Your wedding is not the thing that's at the forefront of everyone's minds. And so they may be very excited, very happy for you, but just completely forget that they haven't told you they're going to be there. So you will have to chase some people. So you want to have a bit of a buffer. Now, the exception to this rule about the timing is if you're having a destination wedding where guests are expected to travel, or if you have a lot of guests who would be traveling from out of town to come to your hometown for the wedding. You want to make sure that you give them enough warning, and that's where a save the date comes in. You could send a save the date as early as a year or even 18 months ahead of your wedding. All you need to send a save the date is you need to know the actual location and the date. So in order to do that, you need to have booked your venue, because your venue will dictate what the location is, the very specific location and the date. You don't have to tell people what the wedding venue is when you send a save the date, but you can give them the county or even the country and the date, and that will help people to know if they can or can't be at your wedding. And in that time, if there's anybody who knows already that they can't be there, they'll tell you. But most people will RSVP when the invitation comes. So you don't want to mess up the timing and give yourself more stress by having to chase people too soon or too close to the wedding. And the final major timeline mistake that couples make is they spend too much of their time focusing on the smaller details. We see a lot of details that are very important, but just not urgent. Things like your reception table shapes, or the exact wine that you want to serve on the day. Like, those things are decisions that will come later. So the timeline mistake is when people give too much thought to those details too early on, instead of focusing on what we call the big hitters. The big hitters are the things you focus on at the very beginning, like your wedding venue, your wedding photographer, your planner, getting the legal side of things done. And there'll be a few other suppliers that you want to make sure you've booked early on. Then there are details that come later. You can't give thought to your wedding table plan until you know who's going to come to your wedding. So you need to make sure that you've got RSVPs in, you've got a final head count, and then you do a wedding table plan. So as you can see, the timing of this is really important. But what I want you to do is to be able to have a think about what is important now, and everything else can wait. So if you want to know which suppliers to book first, episode 30 of the podcast is where we list everyone you should book immediately, and then the ones you don't need to book immediately, we'll get to those. There'll be time, but you don't have to worry about all of those suppliers and all the details that come with those suppliers right now. You'll have time. And a bonus, I know I said we weren't going to talk about the wedding day timeline, but I can direct you to a podcast episode where we did talk about that. So episode 11, we spoke all about the festivities of the day, how you can fit them in perfectly while avoiding those awkward gaps where guests are kind of standing around with nothing to do. Well, thank you for listening today. The Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast is produced by me, Kelly, and mixed, mastered, and edited by Glenn Hartman. For more wedding planning tips, advice, checklists, and more, visit weddingsonline.ie.